Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Brian and Mr. Betcher and two very special friends with us, Andrew Kalat and the other guy, Jerry Bell, from Breaking Down Security and Security, Defensive Security. So
there you go.
Oh, God, it's going so well. It's going.
If you had sent him some swag, he could have gotten this right.
I know, right? I don't have.
I have to send you a pen, I guess.
Yeah. So we this was the first anniversary, and hopefully it'll be more of Breaking Down Security, and the second anniversary of Defensive Security.
That's right.
So we decided to have an extravaganza year-end review. Basically shoot the shit. So Breaking Down Security's format's going to be a little different this time, at least. So I wanted to introduce our friends.
Which you did already.
I did. So I have no idea where to go with this. So what do we want to do first, gentlemen?
So why don't you explain for my listeners, Andy and I's listeners, what your podcast is all about?
Thank
And
you.
for the record, that was Jerry Bell's voice.
That was Jerry Bell. Yeah,
And
that was Andrew Kalat.
I am Andrew Kalat,
Yes.
and we're happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. I'm glad you decided to grace us with your presences. So, Breaking Down Security. Me and Mr. Betcher, his name is also Brian, so I call him Mr. Betcher because that's who he is. We noticed that there was a lack of, at least where we lived, a lack of good education, and in the information security field, we would have people of varying degrees of knowledge at ISSA and OWASP meetings, and people asking us questions like, is OpenSSL really free software? So also in an effort to market ourselves, I decided to start Breaking Down Security in a to get ourselves out there because we needed to market ourselves for better. Yeah, we're selfish bastards, and we wanted to get better jobs, which worked for me. Not so much for Mr. Betcher yet. So Mr. Betcher is looking for jobs. So if anybody's needing a security guy, we're trying to get him away from his current organization.
And where does he live?
He lives in Austin, Texas, but he will work anywhere and for peanuts.
Nice.
No, I'm just messing.
Nice joke. Joke.
So how did defensive security get started, and why did you have an impetus for starting it, or did you just want to do the same thing like us and marketize yourselves?
Well, obviously there's always a selfish aspect to putting this much personal effort and money into something, but I had actually started listening to podcasts probably about 3 or 4 years ago, security podcasts, and at the time, Information Security Daily was going on, and Paul.com, now Security Weekly, was going on. And one thing I noticed is that all of the podcasts out there, with almost no exceptions, were very, very laser focused on either kind of the skateboarding dog, stupid information security stories, or it was about penetration testing, offensive techniques. And talking about the latest exploit or whatever thing in that vein, and there was just a total lack, at least from my perspective, of anything really useful for the defenders. And I know that there's a really gigantic market and a growing market out there for people who are in the defender space, and so. At the same time, I was seeing all of these companies and government organizations being compromised, and the reports of those compromises are being made very public. And it just struck me as a really fortuitous opportunity to talk about things that are impacting other companies and kind of drill into it and learn lessons and communicate it. And at the same time, for me personally, reading and kind of going through those scenarios in my mind, makes me a better person. And then, I started talking to Andy about this idea, and Andy and I have known each other for a long time, probably almost longer than we've not known each other, which is kind of crazy.
At this point.
So, I worked for Andy for a while. He worked for me for a while. We worked together for a while. So, we're very comfortable, I think, interacting with each other. So it was kind of a natural fit. And, we came together and I think it's been about 1.5 years now that you've been with us.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, my motivation really was to ride Jerry's coattails. Was primarily my goal there.
Which has really been how it's been for a long time. So
it's really
true.
Really short coattails, right? Really short.
Once you find a winning formula, you just stick with it. And no, but everything Jerry said, I agree with. And for me personally, it's nice to have a long form platform to really articulate thoughts and really. Yeah. I agree 100% with what Jerry said too. The more I do this, the more it's making me a better, I hope, security guy to have a more holistic and kind of honest view of things and not get too bogged down in the marketing of various vendors' crap. So
yeah,
it's good.
Yeah, me and Mr. Betcher tried to. I try not to deal with the punditry. I mean, one of the reasons we haven't entertained sponsors because we don't want to lose that. We don't want to be, hey, product A is the best thing next to sliced bread when in fact it's a piece of shit or something.
You say that now, but the first vendor who comes with a big check,
I know.
You just say that.
I know.
You're gonna get sucked in eventually if we ever get any good.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's going to happen. We're not that good yet. So.
I know for me. I've learned quite a bit. I've extended my knowledge quite a bit in security, and it's really paid off. So the time I've spent with this guy here, time well spent, right?
Yeah. And, I've only known him 2 years. He actually hired me at the company we used to work at. I probably socially engineered him in some way that he thought I knew what I was doing. But yeah, we're not so much educating others as we're educating ourselves. That was the other reason we wanted to get on and do things. We do videos of Nmap, and we try to market to the folks who are in IT who may want to break into IS, or that compliance guy who wants to understand some of the security tools that the information security folks are using, because compliance is not security, as we all know. So
where can people who follow defensive security find your podcast?
You can go to www.breakingsecurity.com. Now, my last name is Break, like on a car, Brake. So I had to use that somewhere in this podcast, so it became the name. So it's Breaking, Brakeing, security.com. And we also have an RSS feed, so just put breakingsecurity.com/RSS.
Well, there you go.
Yep, and for Breaking Down Security fans, how do we get a hold of Defensive Sec?
You can find us on the internet at www.defensivesecurity.org and on Twitter at DefensiveSec.
Oh, very nice. Yep. Cool. So, we'll probably repeat those at the end, or I'll add a little something to make sure everybody on my podcast at least, can get it again at the end. So.
Good deal.
All right, so we are going to talk a little bit about the current news and maybe a little of the news of the year, things that we, thought was noteworthy with regard to news, and then maybe a little bit about,
our thoughts.
Our thoughts, yeah. And I got some reports because I went to B-Side Seattle, so I'll talk about that at the end as well. So. All right, so since the news thing is kind of your guys' gig, let's go ahead and let you do that.
Sure. So I would say certainly since our last episode last week, Sony continues to be, I would say, front and center in the news. Although interestingly, we haven't learned an incredible additional amount of what actually happened.
Yeah, a lot of the news from Sony is more about the salacious details being dug out of various people's emails and documents that are getting revealed, which I could certainly talk to the ethics of that, but not a whole lot on the InfoSec side.
No.
Yeah, I heard something about that. The president of Sony was talking crap about Angelina Jolie or something.
Yeah, I'm loath to get into that stuff because I don't see a lot of journalistic value or infosec value in digging through somebody's diary and
Yeah.
reporting the drama.
Yeah. Internal emails are internal for a reason, you know?
There's a lot of people who disagree with me on this point. I will tell you that. I've gotten into some massive Twitter debates over this.
You know, there are. This is a tough nut, right? Because on the one hand, I would agree that somebody calling Angelina Jolie, some name is in a otherwise private email setting is probably not newsworthy. But one of the things that did come out, which I think is newsworthy, and really something that I think a lot of companies wrestle with and probably need to think about in hindsight now that we've seen what happened with Sony, is that it's come to light that Sony had a breach in February of 2014 where about 47,000 employees, I believe they were Latin American employees, had their data stolen in a what appears to be a separate breach. There's really no good indication if these are related or not. My first instinct, by the way, was that they're probably related, but we don't really know. But some of the interesting aspects were that Sony apparently had talked themselves into not disclosing it. And one of the interesting things that happens when you have your email laid bare like this is that people get the opportunity to kind of second guess some challenging legal decisions that you make. And I do wonder, because companies make decisions like this all the time, and I think it's very important for people to understand that this is not unique to Sony. Yeah. Companies make risk-based decisions about what they are and are not going to report all the time. And this just happens to be a situation where we saw it happening. And I'm not defending Sony at all. I just don't want people to think that Sony is some exceptional case, because I don't think they are.
Well, I think a bit of a challenge here is that we've crossed boundaries out of our genre media, and we've got things like the Hollywood Reporter, E! Online, BuzzFeed, all these folks who are normally reporting in the entertainment industry suddenly getting a lot of juicy details about a major production company in their world and trying to wrestle with understanding the InfoSec stuff that they're not used to talking about or discussing. And it's always ugly when you start getting folks who aren't familiar with this getting involved, in my opinion. Not that I'm being elitist about it. I'm just saying it's not the beat they're used to covering. So they're going to stumble a bit, in my mind. And I don't know. I do think there is some interesting stuff here worth reporting on. I just see this gleefulness in some of the media of digging through this stuff for malicious things they can report on. That doesn't necessarily further the story. And I think if any organization had all of their internal emails dumped, I think we would see similar type comms at most companies.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important. That's a really important distinction, because I think you're absolutely right. Any given company has a lot of crap in their email system, and that's one of the reasons I did want to talk about that a little bit, because again, companies wrestle with this stuff all the time, and I know, particularly from talking with my friend Bob, that there's a lot of attorney-client privilege communication that happens over email. And, I don't know specifically in the case of Sony if a lot of that or any of it was part of what was dumped. But I do wonder if this is really going to start changing the way those dynamics between, corporate lawyers and, information security people who often interact very closely. I just wonder how that dynamic is going to change now. So.
It might also retention policies could be fixed too. If they could say that this email is not operationally significant, or we'll only keep emails for such an amount of time or only for certain people. Who knows what kind of other stuff is going on? I mean, you've got people sending, joke emails, or you might find out, hey, the chief of operations of Sony is a racist bastard. He's sending out, sexist, and, he was sexually harassing people. So I think you may see a change, at least in their email policies as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. That's a hard pill to swallow for companies, because they're going to keep as many emails as possible, because if something ever comes up, they've got proof that, so and so said something, or so and so was going in this direction. You see a lawsuit between the CEO and the CISO going on about emails. I just don't see it. I think everybody wants to keep this data forever, just in case.
At some level, I think that's going to have to be decided by on a organization by organization basis, based on the risk tolerance of the management team. I reported to the chief operating officer of a company quite some time ago, back in the mid 2000s, and one of the things he was very insistent on was that we implement a 30-day retention policy. Email gets purged, expunged after 30 days. And it was extraordinarily controversial. And his logic was, if you take any given person's email archive, you could probably convict them of just about anything. If you had an adequately shady attorney, parsing the things that are in your email. So, I guess there's two sides to every story. I think you're absolutely right, Brian, that companies do use email as kind of a vault for things, to go back to them. And I do that personally. I mean, it's a bad habit. But, especially in a corporate setting, it's awfully damn nice to be able to go back and say, you know what, you did tell me this thing, and here's the proof, or I did tell you that, and here's the proof.
Yeah.
Well, it's a perfect example of operational use and ease of use versus security.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And where you draw that line. Yeah. So, all that being said, on the flip side, there's a lot of stuff going on with at least we think, the guardians of peace, the people who did the hack. The trouble here is it's really difficult to know when these statements come out if they truly are this group. There's no sort of authentication. They keep releasing data. They're promising to release more data. They came out with a threat against the employees of Sony and said, hey, if you send us your email address and say you don't back your managers, or send us an email, we'll leave you alone. I don't think anybody took them up on that. And then today they came out and said that they're going to somehow commit kinetic terrorist acts against movie theaters on Christmas Day showing the interview. If this was that group, I am incredibly skeptical of their capability or intent to actually commit that sort of act.
Yeah, and they just turned themselves into a joke by saying, we're going to spread terroristic threats. Because now by spreading those terrorist threats, now they can get the FAB and, internal, which is supposed to be internal, like, law enforcement getting involved for even making those kinds of terroristic threats. So they've only made it worse on themselves, I guess, if they weren't worse enough already. So
I still would love to know what the original point behind this was. This clearly is a very personal attack. Yeah. To dump this level of data and being this malicious, it's definitely a different motivator than what we see for most attacks.
Yeah.
So, I'm always, when I look at these stories, one thing I always look for is what is this going to drive? What kind of change is this going to drive? And I'll tell you, I think that Sony is going to be the biggest thing impacting corporate boardrooms since Edward Snowden. And, the Edward Snowden debacle, sent boardrooms into a tailspin about what the hell are we going to do to keep our confidential information away from those stinking contractors, which is completely ridiculous and remains completely ridiculous to this day. And I wonder how Sony is going to manifest itself into that kind of venue as well, because it's going to happen. I just wonder, what exactly is the platform going to be? Is it going to be a something that's sane, or is it going to be something that is kind of wacky, like the whole contractor angle? One of the big challenges we have here is we don't actually know what happened, at least with the data theft, right? There's lots of rumor that it was actually an insider, but I'll tell you, if they did steal terabytes of data, that's, it's probably difficult to do. Let me say it differently. It's much easier to do with USB drives in your pocket than going out their internet connection. So.
Yeah, because there was a lot of rumors and a lot of FUD. Like initially, there were reports that the PlayStation Network, which went off, I guess that went off as well, but that was a separate incident with another different group. That was not Lulz.
No, that was Lizard Squad.
Lizard Squad, yeah. But there was ideas that their Amazon instances were being used to help, torrent the data out of Sony, which was found out to be fake, from what I gathered. There's so much going on with this, so much FUD. I mean, I don't know if it's generated by people who just want to be right, like the first group to mention North Korea. They were trying to, if the media is helping to manufacture just as much of a reputation hit as Sony did to themselves, which one is actually worse, the manufactured or the actual in this case?
It's really difficult, and I have to imagine that this is going to be a well inspected case study for a long time, and I do think that if there is a lesson coming out of this, it's that Sony did a really terrible job of managing the message. And I really think that one of the lessons companies are probably going to take away from this is that they need to have a better plan for managing PR. And I bet you some of the crisis communication companies are, that's probably where you want to invest your investment dollars coming up, because they're going to probably be making some money now.
Well, it clearly was a PR move. I mean, the Guardians of Peace have sent, if you believe them, that it's all them, most of their communiques directly to media outlets.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, the information, they pulled in Mandiant, which, that's kind of the go-to these days whenever a company gets, totally tits up. But, I read that letter that Kevin Mandia sent the Sony executives, and I don't know if I'm just jaded in my older age, because I'm, nearing about 150, but it sounded like he was treating them as children. Like, oh, it was so sophisticated. There was nothing you could do to fix it. Do you think he was blowing smoke up their ass when he was giving this to them to try to make them feel better? Or, I can't help but think that he should have known better than to send something like that, because it doesn't really add any value to his company by him sending the message in the first place.
No, but it adds a ton of value to Sony, and I bet you Sony paid dearly for that letter.
Really?
Something has smelled wrong to me about that letter from the minute I read it. I don't know what. I can't put my finger on it, but something is off there.
It felt like a guy who is trying to comfort his son who ended up last place in a ball game or something. Oh, sorry, son. Tap on the head. You did the best that you could. You'll do it again next year and try even harder, and you still suck at it.
I don't know that they possibly could have known that at that point in the investigation either. Mind you, I wasn't, involved with it, so
yeah.
I have yet to hear anything confirming. Well, it's not that I don't believe that letter happened. I just would love to hear some explanation out of Mandiant for that letter, but I don't think that's ever going to happen at this point.
Well, it'll be a thinly veiled, case study in the Mandiant report that'll be out in February, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Some entertainment company who shall remain nameless.
So if I had to go off on a wild speculation tangent for a second, that letter felt to me like Sony finally hired a PR company.
It was a PR move.
A crisis communication company.
Damn.
It's for an 8-figure incident response contract, you get a "you don't suck at your job" email that you can distribute to your staff,
and which is knowingly going to be leaked outside.
And is knowingly going to be ridiculed by most of the, rationally thinking information security world.
But
but we're 0.001% of the population.
Yeah, and it's also going to probably be admitted into court, into some lawsuits as evidence and things like that. So, I'm sure it's a strategic move, but that's all hyperbole on my part. I don't have anything to base that on.
Probably why Mandiant will never be a sponsor of the Breaking Down Security podcast.
That's right. We've offended every other company, so.
Oh yeah.
So I think that's really kind of catching up to the current state of Sony. There again, I think there's a looming threat of lots more data to be released. I can't imagine what more they would have. Maybe more movies, but all the emails out there, all their financials are out there. Several unreleased movies are out there.
I don't think all the emails out there. What they dropped today was the OST file of the CEO.
Oh, okay. I guess I misunderstood that then.
Yeah, I think a lot of emails out there, but I'm guessing if you believe the 40 terabyte number, I wonder if that's a bunch of OST files.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Could be.
Yeah.
That's a lot of PowerPoint presentations.
That's for sure.
So we'll see.
Yep.
But you're right. We don't know.
That's right. So I guess that's really, from my perspective, the big highlight on news. And I know since it's at the end of the year, one of the things we wanted to talk about was kind of recapping the year, and we made some notes here, and one of the first things I'll ask, and we can go around the room, is what do we know now that we didn't know this time last year? Anybody want to go first?
I'll go.
Sure.
Well, let me see. It started out with Heartbleed, and then Poodle, and then Poodle version 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Poodle NG.
Yeah, Poodle the Quickening or whatever. And but I've gotten to the point where I just can't trust any version or any implementation of SSL or TLS at this point. I mean, Heartbleed pretty much killed V3, SSL V3, which was holding on by a thin string. And then Poodle, basically affects, what was left of the V3 and part of TLS, like 1.0 and 1.1. And then version 2, anything earlier than 1.2 is pretty much suspect and easy to hack. So I've actually gotten to tell my boss at work that anything that we have to do where we're sending data, any software that we use that uses encrypted channels, quote unquote, we should probably be encrypting the data and using the encrypted channel, because I don't believe that that SSL and TLS are anywhere secure at all, ever. Even if we've had Libra SSL and Boring SSL that Google has, both they created Boring and OpenBSD, made Libra, but I don't trust anything that's going on through an SSL tunnel these days.
Yeah, and then Microsoft had S-Channel, their S-Channel bug.
And the S-Channel thing, yes. Yeah, anything earlier than TLS 1.3, I think at this point is, unless we're using perfect forward secrecy, certificate pinning, and HSTS, I can't imagine using just a straight old SSL cert for anything these days and giving it any kind of trust.
So I'm going to be controversial and say I don't think for the most part most of that matters.
In what way, sir?
If you put yourself in the position of someone who wants to exploit the Poodle bug, I mean, certainly S-Channel is a bit different because it's the possibility of remote code execution. But for specifically focusing on Poodle right now, it's a man-in-the-middle attack, and it effectively lets you get, for the most part, we believe, some of the initial bytes of the exchanges, which are where your cookies are going to sit, and so that's a bad thing, right? I would propose that if you are in a position to run man-in-the-middle attacks like that, there are far more effective things for you to do. And so, I've not heard of anyone or any organizations leveraging Poodle. I still think that for the most part, it's kind of an academic thing. Certainly it's not great, right? But from an attacker perspective, there's much easier, much better things to go after. So, and if I were, so let's, as an example, right? I have the defensive security site it runs SSL, right? I don't care if somebody can sniff, the SSL traffic of people downloading my podcast. And I don't think most people do either. There are a relatively limited set of organizations, I think, who are probably in a position where they need to be really paranoid about that stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a generalized issue, and I know a lot of companies are also fretting about this for internal systems. And I would say if you have people man-in-the-middling your internal network traffic, you also have other problems that are probably much more significant than Poodle.
Yeah.
So that's my take. I like to be controversial.
I will preface the whole not trusting SSL thing because the company that I work for now currently, the data that we're passing over that encrypted SSL connection is not something we want out in the open. So
sure.
From a client to us, if the client's got somebody intercepting the information, that's why we don't want to trust our SSL connection. So there are specific use cases where you don't want to trust any kind of SSL connection regardless.
Yeah, I won't disagree with that.
Yep. So what'd you learn, Mr. Bell?
Well, a couple things, and I'd say just generalized, but typified by Heartbleed and Shell Shock and whatnot, that there's a lot of old software that's just hanging out that has bugs waiting to be found. And you know what was interesting about Shell Shock? About a month after Shell Shock came out, and by the way, Shell Shock and Heartbleed were life-altering events for me personally. They were very high demand events. Let's just say that. Shell Shock was interesting because I found a forum. I think it was an email. Actually, it was an email list from 1996 where people were discussing the Shell Shock bug, and it was going around on Twitter. And I actually think I need to go back and look, but I actually think that what's his name, the WikiLeaks guy was one of the people participating in the discussion.
It was Julian Assange.
Yeah, Julian Assange. Blacked out on his name there for a second. So, and at the time they basically said, look at this thing. You probably ought to go fix that at some point, and that was almost 20 years ago.
That was the end of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just fell off the edge.
Yeah, 2-3 posts and then silence.
So I do wonder how much more there is of that, and I think Shell Shock in particular pointed out what I would say is probably the stereotypical problem we're going to find in that we're using code that was written a long time ago in ways that it was never intended to be used.
Sure. And
so we're just finding holes in use cases. So that's I would say that's. Well, I guess the other thing is that vulnerabilities can be marketed.
Oh yeah.
And that drives me crazy. So, Mr. Kalat, what do you think?
Yeah, you guys touched on a lot of good stuff already. I think the one thing I would add that you haven't touched on is the concept of a massive, unexpected exploit and mass patching is a new concept that I think I kind of got my head around. This year. Great point. And to use your favorite term, that black swan event comes out of nowhere.
Who did the black swan thing? Was that Rafal and them over at DTR? Did he make the Black Swan thing?
I'm not sure. It's a term from the financial world originally.
There's a guy named Nassim Taleb who wrote a book actually called Black Swan, and it's about statistics and risks and probabilities, and it's a really interesting and controversial read.
And Jerry loves the term. It's his favorite.
I just love the term and the concept, and by that I mean I don't.
So for me, not to cut you off, Jerry, but just for interest of time, coming to terms with, okay, you're not going to see it coming. You can't forecast it. You don't know what it's going to be, but something big might happen that's industry-wide. How are you going to cope with it is something I'm still getting my arms around.
Yep. Good one.
Okay.
So what about you, Mr. Betcher?
So for me, it's about open source software. Evidently, it's not very tested and not very trustable in general.
My God, we're gonna have the graybeards after us.
Yes, and then we had just assumed that since it was open, everyone had eyes on it, and that just turned out not to be true. And we've touched on Heartbleed, Shell Shock, and OpenSSL and all that. So, yeah, that's my takeaway from this year is if you want to use open source software, I mean, I don't know, it's another risk.
Were you hiding in the B-Sides panel and it's in B-Sides Seattle? Because that exact point came up.
Is that right? Well, cool.
Well, the concept behind open source being more secure is that many eyes are looking at it. You can code audit. And something I've been saying for years is who's actually bothering to code audit?
Yeah. Nobody.
Until something like, a bug comes up and then they scramble all over it and that code's probably relatively secure for a little while.
Yeah.
Like how many new bugs did we find after the bash bug came out in the same segment of code? A ton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'll also say that particularly in encryption algorithms and whatnot, the number of people who can reasonably look at and audit code that implements encryption algorithms is pretty small. You're not going to have the average Joe is not going to be able to open up the innards of OpenSSL, at least the parts where they are implementing the encryption, the actual encryption algorithm, and determine that there's some specific weakness. It's just not practical, and but I think the reality is that what we're finding is that most likely that open source and commercial and closed source are probably close to on par, right? The balance of power or weakness doesn't seem to be heavily in one side or in favor of one side or the other. It's they're both kind of sucky. There is one other observation that I'll make for the year, and it's kind of in the line of what Andy said, and that is that we've also seen instances where you have a pretty significant vulnerability out there and no patch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that induces a lot of hand-wringing, and we've talked about that on our podcast a couple of times. What do? You have this stupid shell shock thing is out there. You've got a system that is vulnerable. You can't patch it. It's really important. What do you do? So.
Well, yeah, I think the key there is you got to think outside of just patching as your only possible reaction.
Yeah.
No, exactly. But that is the historical one security button that we have to push. Well, I guess we have two. We got antivirus and patching.
Yeah. Well, you also, at that point, you've got to think about access controls. You've got to maybe, even change operating systems if you want it to be drastic. Because, during the whole shell shock thing, you just heard, Microsoft over here, their thumb in the pie going, yeah, look at us. We're not vulnerable. Suck all y'all,
Yep.
So.
The other thing I'd say is that clearly the credit card processors have the best fraud detection technology of anybody out there. That's the other thing I've learned this year.
It's very true. That is very true.
It's about protecting the data, right?
And they know how to get a hold of Brian Krebs.
Yes, they do.
No joke. They got him on the red phone or whatever,
Yeah.
Dang. Yeah, he his stock is rising. I remember when he was on one of the early episodes of Paul Security Weekly, and he was just, he was on Risky Business, and he was just some, guy who was working at a newspaper, and now he's, a household name. If it's a breach, call Brian Krebs, that kind of thing.
That's right. So what else? What other things do we think we know now that we didn't know before?
I know that I need to work on learning how to do code audits, or finding or making, myself knowledgeable on it, and then sharing it with other people. Because as we talked about with the open source, Mr. Betcher brought up, I don't think there's any real good lessons or training out there on how to properly do code audits. It may not be that we're not doing code audits because they're not glamorous. There just may be a bunch of people that just don't know how to do a proper code audit. So they're just kind of, hoping that Katrina level event or that shell shock level event doesn't happen to them. And if it does, then they update their resume and they go somewhere else. So one of the things I'm stealing myself to do, which I really don't want to do, but I know it's something I need to do, is learning how to do a proper code audit, which means I'm going to have to go back to the basics, understanding, structures of C or Python and Perl and, Ruby code and stuff like this, in an effort to, get friendly with developers and make it happen.
Well, there's plenty of companies you can hire that's all they do all day.
Blah. Blah.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't give out charity. By God, I need to know how to do this shit.
Well, you can't know everything.
Yeah, see, you know what? I've been told that hurts me, being a generalist. I've been told I'm a generalist, like it's a 4-letter word.
No, it's really tough to go that deep into being a really good code auditor if you also have a bunch of other skill set you have to maintain.
Right.
Well, it's probably one of my CISSP domains, so I could, use that as...
It's going downhill.
Indeed. So we'll move on to, the favorite part of any sort of year-end gig is our predictions. What do we think will happen in 2015?
More retail breaches, I'm betting.
Theme songs for viruses and malware. What again?
The logos will advance to animated GIFs.
Oh yeah, like chibis, like with yeah.
Well, nice. We joke, but just today we saw the stupid Grinch thing, which was what I would say, in my professional opinion, a big nothing. And you have a company trying to spin it as something big. They gave it a name. I don't know if they have a logo, and they're trying to make hay about it. I do think that is going to become a thing, and I think that I don't know how much longer the mainstream news is going to ride on that. I don't know if it's going to be the shark story or if people are just going to get over it. But the issue with Heartbleed and Shell Shock and others is that it rode a wave of media attention, and I really think that that has a very high probability of carrying over into next year, and I think that's a bad thing in general.
I think compliance is going to get a lot tougher. Here you have companies talking about how, we were PCI compliant, but we still got breached. And there's hints of them suing their auditors and things because they didn't find this or they didn't do that. I think it's going to get a lot tougher for companies to get that certification that says, or that report on compliance. That's my thought.
So being a QSA is going to get even harder, you're thinking? Or more expensive, or both?
Both.
They have to carry liability, big time liability insurance.
Yeah.
It's a lot more risk. Yeah, the insurance is going to go up, and the cost of actually becoming compliant is going to go up, and then it's going to be harder. Well, that factors into the cost, of course. It's going to be harder to achieve those compliance.
Well, the other
now.
thing is, and this is the part of the podcast that everyone else gets to, where we get to bitch about PCI, but PCI 3.0 just came out, and it's going to be enacted like January 1. But it's got no more teeth than the old version did. I mean, they've added a few things having to do with hardware and stuff because of I guess that was helpful for Target, but there's no more teeth in it than it was before. They need to do like with the healthcare with the Office of Civil Rights, where they started going in and auditing people and just levying heavy fines on people who were not PCI compliant. Because as somebody who's had to go through PCI audits before, I don't think there's any real teeth to the ramifications of not passing your PCI requirements, or you just drag out your audit long enough and you finally get it because
that's intentional. Keep in mind, the PCI Council wants you to use credit cards. They have a vested interest in using credit cards.
Sure.
It's counterproductive to them to shut you down or to fine you so much that you're going to say the hell with it. They have a dual mandate of promoting the use of credit cards and keeping them secure. So they're at odds with themselves.
True.
And you know what? There's another thing, and we've talked about this too on the podcast. It's a really psychotic problem because we talk about 56 million credit cards at Home Depot and 40 million credit cards at Target, and and on and on and on. That's the number of cards that were stolen. Right? That is not the number of cards that had fraudulent use. And so the groups that PCI's sworn to protect are the card brands. It's Visa, MasterCard, those guys. And those guys are the one, they are they have pretty good fraud systems, and and they are as far as I know, they still have quite low rates of credit card fraud. And the reason is that they have pretty good fraud detection systems, and so they're finding these things relatively early and shutting them down. And I know in the case of Target, I want to say the numbers were something like $43 million in fraudulent charges, and something like $80 or $100 million in card reissuing costs. And one of the observations I'd make is that there doesn't seem to be anybody looking out for those issuing banks that have to eat the card costs. So, it's really an interesting thing because I don't think the card brands look at this as, obviously it's a PR problem, but I don't think that they're not dying, right? They're just not, I don't think they're suffering that bad, right? Because if they were suffering that bad, they would have an impetus to change. They would be the ones doing something to drive change into PCI, and they're not. And, so I think that speaks very loudly for their position. And I think what we are seeing playing out in the courts right now with Target, who's being sued by a number of issuing banks, trying to recoup their losses for reissuing cards and other things. I think that is where I would say a lot of the new development is going to come about. And I wonder if that's going to, we're going to see issuing banks create their own mandate, their own PCI-like thing, because they're the ones who are bearing the brunt of this.
You think they're going to balkanize it? It's going to be, if you want to play with Bank of America, you're going to have to play by X, Y, and Z rules, whereas, TD or, World Bank or whatever, another bank, insert another bank's going to have different requirements for that, so it's going to make it even worse.
That could happen. I would be surprised if that did happen. That'd be it would make the payment card networks pretty complicated. I think what's much more likely to happen is that we see issuing banks start teaming up and forming kind of like PCI. PCI was an amalgamation of different companies coming together to levy standards on retailers. and merchant processors, I have to wonder if we're going to see the same kinds of things coming out of issuing banks.
I think it's just easier to rely on the lawyers to sue the retailers for, their lack of foresight in breaches. I don't know if they're going to form some cabal. I don't see it. I think it's much easier to just sue somebody.
Well, plus whatever they don't get out of the retailers, whatever's left out of the losses that they've had, they just raise the interest rates on the credit cards and get it back through fees from the people. So, we think it's a victimless crime to have your credit card yanked, and like, oh, I don't have to worry about it. My bank's going to pay for everything, and they're getting it back in the end.
Yeah,
we're just not seeing it.
That's
they're
right.
going to raise rates on balance transfers, or they're going to if you withdraw money from your credit card through an ATM or something, you're going to pay, say, 5% now instead of 3.5% on that. So they're going to get their money back and then some, because once they put those in, they're going to be loath to lower those again once that happens. So we're going to see the cost of using a card go up on the back end in the next few months, I think.
I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but if you fail PCI as an issuer, they don't stop you from issuing cards. They just charge you more.
Or you make less per transaction.
Make less per transaction, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think if we're going to see any real change, it's probably going to be at the retailers themselves. If they get enough pain from lawsuits and things that aren't being covered by their cyber loss insurance, they're going to have to take steps beyond PCI to protect themselves.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. But I will say, and we've talked about this as well, there are probably even more so. This is a problem with the smaller retailers.
Mm-hmm.
And
True, but the smaller retailers also aren't handling as many cards, so it's not as big of a breach.
Yeah, fair.
That's
fair. I just think that the smaller companies don't have as much of an opportunity to implement meaningful improvements, and they're the ones that are getting owned in stupid ways. By RDP connections being unauthenticated RDP connections to their POS terminals.
Well, what I could see there is that eventually for these small guys, perhaps these card issuers are going to mandate, encrypted at point of PIN swipe or PIN entry and swipe all the way through. And just, this is the equipment you must use, black box equipment, sort of.
Agree with that. I do agree with that.
Yeah. Certified gear.
Well, that stuff's not cheap, which is why the mom and pop stores won't upgrade immediately, because each one of the new EMV/chip and SIG pin thingies are about $2,000 a piece. And
yep,
those are not, you're not going to drop, I don't know, if you've got 15 terminals in your building at $2,000 a pop, you're going to spend $30,000, which, for Target, I've noticed that they have a lot of new chip and /SIG and pin, terminals on all of their boxes. But yeah, if you're Joe gas station attendant, are you really going to put that kind of skrill into a brand new terminal for that? And you're still going to have gas pumps that got to be retrofitted. I mean, the infrastructure to put out the new chip infrastructure is it's going to take probably another 5 or 6 years before we get rid of the
depends on if
stripes.
They're mandated to do that. That's what it's going to come down to.
So government intervention is what you're saying, Mr. Betch.
Well, I would say more that the card issuers or the processors or whoever may subsidize some of those costs if they really want those guys to be up on a more secure platform.
Yeah.
Could
Well, it could be like the hotel locks, they won't pay for, the company wouldn't subsidize the replacement of the locks. So the hotels had to pay for each lock.
Right.
And then, so the hotel said, yeah, we're going to change them. They're just going to stay, vulnerable. So
nice.
Hopefully that won't be that way with credit card vendors. So, and that has been the year-end edition of Let's Bitch About PCI.
Yes.
So moving on from PCI.
Yes.
My prediction for 2015 is the government is going to make a play to do national level InfoSec defense because of foreign entity cyber war threat fears stupidity.
Bingo. Oh, I'm sorry. I fell out my blackout card here. So
yeah. I don't think they're going to be successful, but I think they're going to make a play for it.
It's coming.
Well,
I agree.
They have they have Cyber Defense Command. You know, they've got the Air Force with their bit. You know, the FBI's got their cyber security group.
Yeah, DHS has the mandate now to protect critical infrastructure, which has yet to be defined.
And that paints a broad stroke, that critical infrastructure. Pretty much you could classify anything as critical infrastructure.
That's right.
Every utility, internet service provider, you know, all the way down to crossing guards could be critical infrastructure if you wanted to.
Well, yeah, when
such.
last time they shut down the government, they shut down everything but critical infrastructure. Turned out critical infrastructure was 83% of the government. So, you know, it is a broad brush.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think unless they get better guidelines, you know, we're still going to have the same issue that we had now. You know, unless they want to create a TSA-like entity that's nothing but cyber warrior defenders.
They'll suck at it. Don't get me wrong. They'll be terrible.
Yeah.
But they're going to make a power play for it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Or at least start to build the only way we can help ourselves from things like Sony is if we nationalize this and blah, 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 blah.
And then outsource it to Raytheon.
Right. Absolutely.
Great. The
And for the
KPMG of security vendors.
Yeah. I don't in any way believe that North Korea was behind Sony, by the way. I'm incredibly skeptical of that statement. But I know. But at a more legitimate level, we are seeing a lot of information theft coming out of China, Russia, etc. And that is getting a lot more visible. And I think that is going to get some pressure on the government to do something.
Save us.
Yeah.
Save us.
And they'll gladly step up and try to do something. And it won't help.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll need to have Dave Kennedy go back in again and tell them what they're doing wrong, and then they won't listen to him either again. And, you know.
Yep.
All right, Mr. Betcher, what's your prediction-ish thing for 2015 and beyond?
I already went the compliance frameworks and stuff.
Oh, that's right. Who didn't go?
We done with that?
I think we all went. So themes for, I guess we're probably a little out of order, but what about themes for 2014? What did you think were the themes we saw in information security for 2014?
We had a couple breaches.
Just a few.
Yeah, retailers. Yeah.
Healthcare, community health systems. That was a weird one, community health systems. They found out it was China who actually did it. But that's not usually their MO. Theirs is IP and you know, defense plans for the F-35, Joint Strike Fighter, and those kinds of things. Taking health records doesn't make any sense unless they had some, you know, they were a third party who wanted that information. That would just seemed odd to me and kind of stuck out.
Well, what if, and I don't have any particular insight, you know, maybe my friend Bob does. What if community health systems maybe had, as a patient, some interesting people?
Sure.
That China might care to know about their medical history.
Or what if sometimes bad guys just go after random crap to go after random crap?
So they didn't know what they were hacking, and, you know, oh, look what I got here. Oh, well, this will come in handy eventually.
It's a training run.
Hey, there you go. That's right.
Yeah, we assume perfect knowledge and perfect motivation. Sometimes shit just happens.
They do it for the lulls, and that's it. Eh?
Or just a challenge, you know, keep their skills sharp.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But I would say the two big themes were mass breaches and mass vulns were the ones that, you know, I would probably chalk down for 2014.
Yeah. Yeah. And if your code spaces, it wasn't a good year for you either. So that happened back in June. I was trying to remember that because I heard about it on Risky Business, but yeah, the value of using two-factor auth on your Amazon virtual private cloud is very, very important because that code spaces was a GitHub-like website for posting snippets of code and what have you, like software repositories. Somebody got in, basically deleted everything and deleted the backups, and basically they had no recourse but to say, well, we quit this bitch, and that was it. So they had to board themselves up, and then there's no more code spaces, which is why you never hear about them anymore.
Yeah, that was a particularly bad one because they actually billed
Vicious.
themselves as being highly redundant and backed up. And what ended up being the case was they had instances at other data centers, which were all under the same AWS account. And so when that bad guy got in, he just went and deleted everything, including the backups.
Everything was under one dashboard, and that was it. So.
Yep. So what were your themes for the year, Mr. Brake?
I'm gonna have to say the further erosion of the trust of the government. I mean, we're not getting any more Snowden leaks. Greenwald seems to have decided he wanted to monetize all the EDS stuff that came out. But from a physical security sense, in the last at least 3 or 4 months, I mean, it's all been about the negativity of the people who are supposed to keep us safe from a physical sense. Law enforcement, and the fact that some people appear to be above the law with regard to some government programs. You had the CIA report come out, and all these things that you didn't wish, or were the things of Hollywood, where it's like, you got the agents who are doing whatever they can to stop the terrorists. I think and then you get law enforcement types who say that using encryption on phones is akin to helping, pedos and terrorists. I think Eric Holder mentioned that, using, having Apple devices with encryption that Apple can't get into. Verizon's got a brand new VPN service that plays friendly with the NSA. Well, what the fuck you want to use that for? If the NSA can get into it, then China can get into it, because they both play from the same playbook. I think that at some point we're going to have to, get involved with creating new encryption schemes or new encryption technologies that are basically one way. I mean, you're seeing that a lot in some file sharing companies these days, where they're like, you encrypt everything on your desktop and upload it, and we can't do anything with it. We can't recover anything. Cubby comes to mind. One is called Cubby. We don't endorse them. I don't know who they are, but we did test them out at my company. Everything was two-factor auth. Once you upload it, if you lose the keys, you're screwed. They can't even help you get it. It's that kind of encryption level. But I think we're gonna see a lot more having to do with technologies. We tried the black phone. It failed, of course, almost as quickly as it occurred with the Pondone. But I think we're going to see a lot more things with security, and then in the likewise, we're also going to see the Internet of Things, which is just a pile of fail, epic pile of fail. So, encryption on some things, and we're going to have the Internet of Things that's going to just continue to fail awfully. So, I think that's where I got this year, and where we're gonna see that go, because the Internet of Things is still a whole mishmash of crap. So,
well, you're a pile of happy.
Yeah,
I know.
Wow. So, Mr.
No, I've been ranty. I didn't.
What about you, Mr. Betcher? What did you see as the themes for 2014?
Well, I'll touch on that in a second. I just want to touch on something Brian mentioned, was the Internet of Things, and I just want to add to that probably the willful erosion of privacy along with that, right? Because you see people get these things and default passwords on your cameras and things like that. So yeah, privacy, and I don't know if most people care anymore, or they even know, that their privacy is being eroded right out from under them.
You make a great point. We care deeply about this, but as I said before, we're 0.001% of the population.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people couldn't even know that they don't know, or care that they don't care. it's just not even in their frame of reference. It's
there's
not their world.
I think there's a large swath of the population now who are perfectly okay with with handing over their their details to the government in an effort to make them safer. And it's growing, and by the way, just to go off on a political tangent for a second, it's interesting because I've said this before. I see us doing all the things that my dad, long, long ago when he used to tell me about, Russia and East Germany and East Berlin and what happened behind the Berlin Wall. And, it just is so interesting to see how far we've come, relative to what used to be what we saw as as something that stood us apart or separated us apart from the rest of the world in terms of liberty and things like that, and we just we've kind of cavalierly pushed that aside.
Well, we assumed that we were above such things, that we don't torture, we don't listen in like Russia or China to people's conversations and what have you, and then we've got Snowden coming out, or we've got all these different things coming out, finding out that we in fact do everything that China does or Russia. So we harp on other countries' human rights violations when in fact we're basically calling the kettle black at this point, and we're a pot. There's no real good place to go. I mean, you can't go, well, I'm just going to leave the United States and go here because it's better. You've got Australia doing the same thing with their immigration stuff, and I'm not getting on immigration and things, but you hear about human rights violations there on the island that they sequestered all the people trying to come into Australia. You've got all kinds of various things going on that, it seems like all, anarchy, it's all the government's fault, and they're just doing it because we let them do it. On September the 12th, 2001, we wanted them to do whatever they could do to keep us safe, and we forgot to go, okay, we can handle it now, we're good. And we forgot to tell them that, and they continued on with what they were doing and made it worse.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
So yeah, to my what are we talking about? Themes of 2015.
Yes. 2014.
Yeah. What'd you learn this year, son?
Malware. Just malware is a big thing. It's a big deal. Malware wider. It's like an arms race, right? I think malware is getting better. We're getting a little bit better at defending it with all these breaches, and most of the big breaches that we see, I mean, a lot of it had to do with, getting malware into the environment and pivoting off of that and spreading. I think, malware is going to continue to get better. We're going to get, I think the gap is going to widen between defense and the malwareans.
The malwareans, nice.
You haven't listened to Michael Goff's interview, have you? That's his term, but he said we could use it.
Nice.
One of the things I was mentioning, you were mentioning about the malware stuff. If I can go this direction, a lot of the breaches, probably 99% of them, have been companies that are older companies. You've got Target, Michaels, Home Depot. All of these companies had older legacy networks. They're huge monolithic organizations that I would probably consider their processes very slow, very meandering. They did, I have yet to see a startup that has had a major breach very similar to this. I mean, other than having a password dump like, say, LinkedIn or whatever.
Well, how old is Jimmy John's?
Yeah, how old is Jimmy John's, Betcher? Aren't they headquartered in Texas? Great.
I don't know. They came on so fast.
That's true.
But I think one of my themes is that
1983. Sorry.
Okay, well, I guess they're a little older. They're I thought they were newer than that, but um, I think there's emerging a playbook on how to perpetrate these breaches, and it's really becoming commoditized the whole way through. And I really think we're seeing this turn into an economy, and that's probably going to keep going, I would think. But if you look at, I bet you if you were to really analyze and lay Target and Home Depot and PF Chang's and all these other organizations side by side, you're going to see a lot of similarities that probably indicate that there is becoming a very well refined playbook on how to do this. And I'm sure there are malware suppliers who are more than happy to to tweak something for the particular environment that you're going into, and I think that is, for me, one of the really big themes is that this is becoming a very substantial criminal enterprise, and I don't know where it really ends, because one of the points I wanted to bring up is that we saw in years past lots of systems being compromised, and what did they do? They installed a Bitcoin miner, right? Because it was an easy thing to do. Well, it's not an economical enterprise anymore, and so now it's we're not going to install a Bitcoin miner. We're going to install something that encrypts your files in exchange for Bitcoin. So it's essentially a Bitcoin miner, just in a fundamentally different form factor. I really think that the organized crime, or the black market, is really turning in on itself, or turning in on the technology industry as a very profitable money-making venture. And as defenders, we've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah. Well, the breaches and everything, it could just be reconnaissance. I mean, how many people go into conventions and they, you hear people talking crap about their companies offline, friend DA kind of stuff. Oh, we don't log this, and we don't have anything going on with patches. And
sure,
we're 8 years behind on Java. Tee hee hee. Well, that guy goes and tells somebody who may have an unsavory friend. I'm not saying that that's the way it happens, but it could be just something as simple as that. Or you get some guy who wants to vent on Facebook. I mean, the whole idea, and we were talking about this for pen tests, when you're doing reconnaissance, you can find all kinds of things. So if you find out that Company X is looking for a new a logging system or something, or they've been hitting up certain vendors for certain things that that they must be deficient on, or they wouldn't be looking for these things. So if they're not, if they're looking for a new patching system, or they're looking at log correlation engines or something like that, they may not be doing logging properly. So that would be a way to get in and stay long term to a system, aka some retailer that we mentioned earlier. You did mention playbook. I bet there is special rules, or there is a guideline that would work for probably the vast majority of organizations, and it's still working to this day. That, because we mentioned what was that one credit card processor? They've been in 5 years, infiltrated. Mm-hmm. Pay anywhere, cash anywhere, something like that. Charge anywhere. That's what it is. They've been inside the system for 5 years, since November 2009. And
this is the classic problem of defender versus attacker. The attacker can be wrong a million times. The defender has to be right every time.
Sure,
it's an off-made observation, but it still applies.
Yeah, but isn't that something blue teamers use to kind of justify losing?
Well,
no.
You can turn that on its head. If once the attacker's inside, he makes one mistake, he's caught.
Correct. If you're looking for the right thing, yeah.
If you know what you're looking for.
Yeah, but then
that's the shift, right? We've got to shift away from prevention into monitoring and containment.
Mm-hmm. Detection.
Yeah, but I think at the same time, though, it's a fallacy to think that once they're caught, they're gonna take their ball and go home. No, they're gonna they're gonna wait a day and then they're gonna try something new.
Yeah.
From some other location. So I think it is I know a lot of people are very critical about that. About that saying, but I think it holds a lot of water. It holds a lot of truth. Those of us who are in defensive roles know, that is a real problem. We have to be right every time, and that's a very difficult thing to do. And by the way, the other thing that I wanted to say as far as a theme that we've started to see emerge this year is the importance of vendors in the breach
You mean
cycle.
third-party vendor connections?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So, Fazio Mechanical with Target, and, I suspect we're going to find out more. Some of these other major breaches probably happened as a result of vendor connections. But, I really think that going forward, I know particularly in the banking sector, that vendor oversight is really starting to heat up. So I expect that this is going to be one of the new frontiers. It certainly was an important point in 2014, but I think it's going to keep getting more important.
Yeah, and the hospitals and healthcare have definitely started looking at that with regard to their business agreements and refining those things. I still keep tabs on the healthcare industry. I was a consultant before I worked with Mr. Betcher doing audits for hospitals, and I don't know how many times I went into a hospital and asked them, when was the last time you updated your contract with your third-party vendors? And they were like, and I was like, well, if you've got to think about it, it's been too long. Or if it's a handshake agreement to take out, the secure documents and shred them for you or burn them for you, you probably need to get something on paper that says, you're doing it and you have a certificate that says it was been done. Those
and then shred it.
Yeah, and it's been shredded. Yeah,
that's right.
So, yeah, third-party agreements, I agree, are going to be should be something that they had looked at a long time ago.
So, all this being said, what is the one piece of advice you guys would give most companies that they could do better in 2015?
Watch cornhole.
All right, that's a show. Thanks for coming, everybody.
All right, well, we were doing great until that. Anyway, I would say, and we did 3 podcasts with Michael Goff, malware researcher, and one of the big things that he kept talking about was monitoring. And I would say if there's one thing that a company can do, it's to start doing better monitoring, period. If you're not doing it, you just need to do something, whether it be a centralized log management or what have you. But yeah, monitoring is probably one of the best things you can do. Monitoring your systems for files that change or get added, monitoring logs for successes of logins, monitoring properly. Don't get the alerts. I mean, what was it? Neiman Marcus, 60,000 events a second or something. They shouldn't have been getting 60,000 alerts a second. Because that leads to, well, let's just put the little bird to hit the accept on the, on the keyboard, the little water bird. You're gonna get apathy at that point, or people who aren't paying attention to the big flashy red light because it's always flashing red. Well, great. So yeah, monitoring, I would say, is probably the one thing that I would say companies need to do, other than upgrading to Windows 10, because if you're on Windows 7 right now, it's going to take you forever to get to 8.
Interesting.
Nice.
I do agree with your monitoring comment. I guess the other one piece of advice I would give, and I hope to give some talks about this in 2015, but is that we need more, and I hate saying it this way because it sounds very derogatory, but we need more competent IT architects that understand the limitations of technology and how technology fails, because when you look at some of the fundamental issues that enabled Target and Home Depot and many others that I can't talk about, it all comes down to architecture problems. Obviously logging is very important, but I think it's even more fundamental than that. We have misplaced trust in technology, and we need to. I think we need to get away from that, or at least do a better job of managing it.
Yeah.
So Brian kind of took mine, the detection aspect of it. So I guess that's why we do a podcast together. We kind of think alike. So I'm gonna shift over to, and it goes along with your architecture, Jerry, is hire great developers. I think train the developers you have on secure coding. I know SANS offers tests that you can give your developers on how well they their knowledge of security, secure coding, and that'll give you a baseline. And developers, they just want to write code that works, and they're not necessarily concerned in security by default.
Can't even get them to comment. Let alone.
Exactly. So I think an investment in secure development would pay mass dividends, in my opinion. So if you do have a development shop, I think it would be wise to train your developers and invest in secure coding.
Nice. How about you, Andy?
Yeah, you guys all have great points. I would say, ideally, you've got to shift your mindset and assume you will be breached, and war game that out and have a plan.
So always work from the vantage point that they're already inside. Mm-hmm. So what you're doing now is containment. Giving up the endpoint.
And having a plan that, you don't want to be in a panic mode when you're dealing with this, right? We're moving into an area of continuous incident response. Sure. So it's get your arms around that and start talking about, okay, where are our assumptions? Back to Jerry's point a little bit. What are our assumptions and what's working here? And what if that were to fail? What does that mean? What would we do for your least most critical functions and data?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, be more skeptical.
Oh, yeah. Without a doubt. Trust but verify, and then verify your verification.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess we've gone about an hour and a half. Shut
up. Really?
Yeah.
Yep.
Holy balls. All right.
So, yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, because I've got so much I wanted to ask you. I've got other ideas and stuff. We probably need to do another podcast sometime later in the year and talk about, maybe we'll just have one of you on because both of you are just, it's too awesome, really. Something.
It's too something. It's
yeah. Because I wanted to ask about, papers and stuff, because I've been asked to maybe submit a paper for B-Sides Las Vegas, because my friend now, Tottenkoff, wants me to submit something, and I was like, I don't know how to do a paper. I don't know what the hell to talk about because I'm not special. And so maybe we'll have a podcast about that, because I know there must be a ton of people out there who are like, I'd love to give a talk, but I don't necessarily know how to give a talk.
Find something you're passionate about. That's one thing. Because it helps, right?
Yeah.
If you're passionate about it, it's going to come through. That's what you want.
Okay. Wow.
But yeah, I'd love to do another podcast with you guys anytime.
Yeah, cool. So, whichever one of you is not available, we'll do it that day.
Good deal.
Sounds like a plan.
Right on.
Well, thank you very much for setting this up. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Let everybody know where you're at on Twitter and the face spaces and the my tweets and whatever's,
So you can find Defensive Security on the internet at www.defensivesecurity.org. And you can find us on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink and Mr. Kalat on Twitter at Lurg. How about you?
Let's see. Mr. Betcher is at Betcherpwned. That's BOETTCHERPWNED.
I just have to. I just have to say that is a fantastic Twitter handle.
His Gmail is Betcher Not Secure, and I'm like, come on, man. I mean, I got breaks. I got the whole break thing. So I'm at Brian Brake. I'm not fancy. BRYANBRAKE. You can get us at breakingsecurity.com. My last name, INGsecurity.com. We're on Tumblr, LO, Facebook. Got about 4,800 followers on Facebook. Google Plus, pretty much any social network except Pinterest, because that's where bored housewives go for recipes. Yeah, that's it.
Well, we will not be sponsored by Pinterest anytime soon.
That's right.
Well, you guys, you didn't make that comment necessarily yet. So, well, that was it for the first annual Breaking Down Security, Defensive Security extravaganza. So, yeah, thank you, gentlemen. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and thank you for taking your time out to be on our little podcast here, and we're grateful for being on yours.
Well, likewise, thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Right on.
Indeed. Talk to you guys soon. Take care.
Take care.
Take care, everybody.
It's a wrap.
Bye.
Later.